Well, good morning. Hey, all right. Appreciate my mom starting that clap. My name is Brandon. I'm one of the pastors here, and it's great to be here. As Josh, our host, mentioned, Pastor Kevin's out of town, but I love this campus. I love being here, and I don't know if this is a hint for me to take a bath or whatever, but I'm excited to speak to the baptistry and the rest of you who are here. Kevin got the coolest phone call from his mom, our campus pastor here, earlier this year. His mom called him and said, "Hey, I want to do something special for your daughter, Maggie. She's graduating from high school this year, and I just want to do something really special for her." He's like, "What do you want to do, Mom?" She goes, "I want to take her to Australia." Yeah, that's exactly what I said. And then I thought about when I graduated from high school, and my parents didn't take me to Australia. They took me to Olive Garden, okay? That was the deal, right? And then I continue, Kevin's telling me the story, and he's like, then my mom says, "Hey, and not only that, I want to take you with me." So I want to make it this amazing trip where it's like mom, son, and granddaughter, and they're just on this incredible trip. And again, I called his mom immediately, got on the phone, and just said, "Would you like to adopt me?" And she said, unfortunately, no. She goes, "You don't wear enough skinny jeans or V-neck shirts, so I cannot become a weir." I'm like two Kevins, but anyways, but we're excited for Kevin. He's in Australia. We've got a photo of him, I think, right? Do we get one? Yeah, he texted one. There they are. Everyone should go, and then inside just be really jealous that they're in Australia and we're in Roanoke, Texas. But anyways, it's all good. We're happy, right? We're going to talk about generosity today. It's going to be great. It's just crazy generous to take your kids, your grandkids to Australia. True? And we've been talking about generosity this past month. And we've been in this series called Crazy Like Us. And we've been talking about how to really live a generous life and kind of how to get out of this crazy cycle of overspending and debt and stress and worry and kind of move into this place of living with purpose and fulfillment and joy and leaving a legacy. And just how to truly be crazy generous. And we've been doing that as a church around here. The last 2 years, we've been part of this generosity initiative called Uncharted. And we've just been celebrating the last, 7-8 weeks. We've been showing you a story every week of just how your generosity has made a difference during Uncharted. And, we've, just to give you some of the highlights, and I know some of you have heard these already, but we just want to say thank you because your generosity and our generosity together, all of our campuses, we've been able to pay down $8 million of debt over the last 2 years. That's a huge deal. That's exciting. That's something that we should be excited about. We've been able to give over $2 million to local, national, and international missions. We've been able to start 2 new campuses that are together combined reaching over 800 people. Just amazing things. Here's the thing I love. As one of the pastors here, I just get to see individual lives change. I get to meet people who are, your generosity is impacting and changing their lives, and we get to see that really happening because the church is being generous, and so we just celebrate that. Now listen, last week Kevin spoke and Kevin talked and gave the message, and really the big takeaway was this, that generosity is more than random acts of giving. And we're all about random acts of giving. We think that's great. We're like, hey, listen, buy a bunch of Girl Scout cookies, buy extra when she shows up, get the Thin Mints, put them in the freezer, whatever. Be generous, when you have that opportunity. Or if you're at the drive-thru, buy a Starbucks for the person behind you. Or if you're at Chick-fil-A, buy a sandwich or buy the family a meal behind you. Just practice random acts of kindness. That's great, random acts of generosity. Those are natural. That's normal. That should be normal for us. When we hear about a family on Facebook who's going through a tough time that we know, and they've got a GoFundMe, give a little bit, right? Give a little bit. Help out if you feel led to do that. But we've been talking about, is that really generous or is that just normal? And Kevin talked about last week, that's normal. That's how we should all live. That's how we should all live. We should just look, when we have an opportunity to be kind or be generous, we need to make a decision about it and do it. But that's not necessarily generous. And so we've been kind of trying to redefine what generosity is. And so this is the definition. I'm just going to put it up on the screen because we've been kind of redefining this and talking about what generosity is. Being generous is this. It really is the premeditated. This means you have a plan. It's calculated. This means you know how much, you know the amount. It's designated. It means you know where your generosity is going, right? And it's the emancipation of, which means we're going to set it free. I love that. We're going to set free the things that we have and of our personal financial assets. And so this whole series is about how to be generous in the most effective way, because we don't want you just to be random with your giving. We think that you can be much more effective if you have a plan, you have a budget, you know what's going on. And here's the thing about generous people. Here's what we know. Persuasive people like me, we can get up on stage and we can tell you like sad stories, we can tug at your heartstrings, we can even make you cry in the way we communicate. But here's the thing about generous people. They don't need to be sold. Like they don't need that. Like you can invite, some of you have been invited to like a friend's fundraising banquet. That's always great, right? Hey, what are you doing Friday? Do you want to come to this deal, right? And you go and you're like, oh man, they're showing videos and they're making us cry. And it's like but if you're generous, like you can go to a fundraising banquet for like starving puppies who are homeless and you can say no. And it's not because you don't like puppies. It's because you're okay. You're just like, well, I have a plan, and I just right now I can't do that. You're okay with that because you don't give out of guilt. You don't give out of emotion. If you're really a generous person, that's not what steers you. You have a plan. Your life has really been organized, or your whole world's organized around generosity. Now, here's something that you may not believe, but it's true. Americans feel financial pressure. Most Americans feel financial pressure because they've never learned to be generous. They do. We think oh no, it's a lack of money. No, it's not a lack of money. We've never learned to be generous. And how many of you in this room, how many of you have ever experienced financial pressure? Come on, how many of you? Come on, right? All of us, right? It doesn't matter if you got your first job or you're trying to retire. There's just all these seasons in our life. It's stressful. The term most associated with money is the word worry. That's it. That's it. And we get into this cycle. We worry. Will I have enough to retire? Can I buy this ring? I don't know if you should, but should you buy the ring? Do I have enough to buy a house? Will I ever get ahead? Will I ever get out of debt? Will I ever be able to pay for college? No, you won't. I'm doing that right now. My daughter's there. And we worry. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And you know what our response to this is? Our next step is we spend more than we make. We worry, and then we spend more than we make. We're like, you know what? I got to have this, got to do this. So we spend more than we make, and we're in trouble. And then as a result of that, what happens? We get into debt, right? And we get into silly, dumb, stupid debt for things that we cannot live without, right? And the minute we buy them or the minute we make that first payment, they just drop off in value, and we're like, what was I thinking? Right? What was I thinking? And then consequently, you have no margin. And this is the cycle, right? This is the cycle we get into. We have no margin in my life. And when you have no wiggle room, when you have no margin, what happens? You start worrying again, don't you? And this is when we grow some gray hairs or lose our hair or whatever it is, right? We stress out. It's tough. This is the American way of finances. This is it. This is what we do. We worry. We spend more than we make, right? And then we get into debt and we have no margin. We worry again and we just go round and round and round. And I see some heads nodding in here because that for so many of us is the cycle that we're trapped in. And here's what we think. We think that making more money will get rid of this. We'll just erase this off the screen of our lives. But here's the thing. If you make a little bit, if you make a ton, if you make, in the middle, wherever you're at financially, your spending habits and your habits, they'll be the same. Like whatever you're doing right now, they'll be the same. And we think, no, I think I can make this work. Here's what really drives this cycle. Like this cycle that you're looking at on the screen, here's what really drives it. It's a mindset. It's a belief. And it's a belief. We call it the consumption assumption. It's called the consumption assumption. The consumption assumption is not a song from Schoolhouse Rock, okay? It's not. It's actually the belief that whatever I make, right? Whatever I receive, it's all for me. It's all for me to consume. And the consumption assumption, that's how we live our lives. That's why this cycle happens in our lives. And what happens is this, we think, well, I'll get out of this. I'll make more money. No, you won't. Because the more you make, it doesn't matter. Your habits will stay the same. This is really a self-control issue. That's really what it is. When you spend more than you make, that's a self-control issue. And the debt that we choose to go into, buying those things we cannot live without, we gotta have them, right? What is that? That's a contentment issue. That's what that is. That's an issue in our hearts with contentment. And making more won't fix your lack of margin, because you know what a lack of margin is? A lack of margin is a discipline issue. It's not about how much is coming in, it's your discipline. It's a discipline problem. Now, some of you are still thinking in the back of your mind, but what if I won the lottery? Like, would I get out of this circle? Here's what's crazy. Over 70% of people who win the lottery go bankrupt. And the rest don't do much better. We think, yeah, but wait a second, Brandon. What if I got like millions of dollars of inheritance, right? What if my ship came in, right? I didn't know, grandma just millions of dollars showing up Monday morning. It won't change. And you're thinking, no, but maybe they'll find oil in my backyard like the Beverly Hillbillies. It'll be amazing. And I'll have a whole new life. No, you won't. Because here's the thing, and I want you to hear this. Making more money does not generate more self-control. We all know people, right? We can all think of someone right now who makes a lot of money and who's made really foolish decisions because they don't have self-control, right? And making more money, it doesn't produce more discipline in our lives. Making more money does not produce more contentment in our lives. And so that worry consumes us. And here's the thing I want you to get. Worry is not a money problem. At the top of this little cycle, it's not a money problem, okay? Worry is a spiritual problem. Spiritual problem. Jesus does not say in the New Testament, Jesus doesn't say, listen, you want to worry less? You need to make more money. Jesus doesn't say, hey, you want to worry less? You got to get out of debt. You got to make more money. Jesus doesn't say you got to make more money. No, here's what he says. He says the reason that you worry is because you've put your trust in riches, not the one who richly provides. That's it. Now look at this chart again. Let's put this up on the screen, right? What is this? Like, what is this really? Let me tell you what this is. This is crazy. Look at the person next to you and go, that's crazy. Just tell them. Tell them that's crazy. Okay, guys, I'm a little bit into audience participation because I'm in church and I think you should be excited to be in church. And if you're not, well, you're going to find this church is really exciting, so deal with it. But anyways, so just for fun, we're going to try that one more time. You got to be awake, man. This is crazy, guys. This is crazy. Tell them this is crazy. Thank you. Thank you for just faking excitement. It makes me excited. Now, here's the thing. No matter how many zeros are on your paycheck, right? This is not mutually exclusive. It doesn't matter. If you make minimum wage or you're a Fortune 500 executive, this is how so many of us live. Honestly, probably how the majority of us live. And there's so many of us that are like, no, I'm the exception. Like, let's be real. This is this cycle we get stuck in, and this is the hard truth. You know what Jesus calls this way of living? Consuming everything we receive and not having any extra. Do you know what Jesus calls this? He calls this greed. He calls it greed. Like when you assume that everything you make is for your consumption, when it's me first. And listen, you might you might find a little margin here and there to give a little bit, give a little here. But when it's like, I'm going to consume, it's for me. This is the cycle of greed. And Jesus warns us about this in the scriptures. Luke 12:15, Jesus says this. He says, don't live by the consumption assumption. He says, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in the abundance of your possessions. And he not only warns us about this cycle of greed, he says, listen, it can enslave you. And some of you feel that today. As we looked at that chart, you feel like a shackle on your ankle. That's how you feel. And Jesus says this, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And here's what we want you to know during this series. God is not against money. He's not. God's for money. Money is not the root of all evil. No, listen to what an old man named Paul wrote to a young man named Timothy in the Bible and to his whole church. He said this, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. When I read that last sentence, just look at that, have pierced themselves with many griefs, you know what I think of? That circle. I think of that circle. Because Jesus is saying, hey, be on your guard. Don't let money be your master. Because he knows this, greed will always lead to worry and discontentment. That's it. And in the words of Admiral Akbar from The Empire Strikes Back, great theologian, it's a trap, okay? It's a trap. This circle is a trap. You're welcome, Star Wars fans. And if you're a Star Trek fan, you're just a bigger nerd than I am. Anyways, Jesus does not want you to be trapped in this greed cycle. There's a different way to live. There's a different way to be crazy. Now, if you think about it, most of our financial angst is the result of wanting what we can't get, not needing what we don't have. But here's the good news. You can learn to be generous. You can. We have a class around here called Financial Peace University. It's going to be kicking off the first of the year. You should go through Financial Peace University. And here's what you're going to learn going through that, is that generous people organize their life around generosity. Generous people have a plan. And that's how they get off this Ozzy Osbourne crazy train of greed. That's how they do it. And Jesus can help us with this. You know, Jesus often taught in parables. I love Jesus' parables. They're kind of interesting because they're not real stories. They're fake stories. They're fake people told to help real people with real issues. And they're full of spiritual truth. Let's look at one from Luke chapter 12, verse 16. Jesus says this, and he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yield an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store whose crops? My crops. The consumption assumption, right? Consumption assumption. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And there I'll store my surplus grain and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Does this sound familiar? Jesus is describing someone who's consuming everything and who's in this cycle and thinking to themselves first. And here's the truth. Generous people don't assume it's theirs to consume. Generous people don't assume it's theirs to consume. But God says to him in this parable, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? And here, you know what the answer is? Somebody else. Not because they were generous, but because they're dead. They're gone. That's why they're consumable, they're disposable, they're no longer around to use or give away those things. Someone else will consume all that stuff. And Jesus, I love this, he steps out of the parable and he looks at me and he looks at all of us and those of you watching online and he says this. He says, this is how it will be, a total loss. This is how it will be with whoever, that's all of us, whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich towards God. Let me ask you something. How many of you have been to a funeral? How many have been to a funeral? Yeah. I've been to a lot of funerals. How many of you have been? I know I've prayed with people by their bedside in the hospital before they die. You've been by someone's deathbed. That's a hard memory, right? For a lot of us, my mind is filled with some really tough memories when I think about being by someone's deathbed. How many of you, just show of hands, you've cleaned out someone's house after they've died? You've had to do that. You have to go in there and box things up, right? You have to go in there and find things and do that. If you've experienced all of those or some of those experiences, you have a greater understanding of what Jesus is talking about in this parable. Because he says, hey, your life will be demanded from you. Jesus, the whole point is this. Since it's all going to be taken away, why would you miss the opportunity to give it away? Right? Because you can't take it with you. In Matthew chapter 25, starting in verse 14, Jesus tells another parable that can help us really uncover what it means to be generous. Jesus says this, he says, again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave how many bags of gold? Oh boy, you guys are struggling. All right, that's good. Kevin will be back next week. Just want to let you know that. That's good. But for right now, you're stuck with me, the Scottish Mexican guy, for about 15 more minutes. So here we go. You got to respond. Here we go. How many bags? There you go. Awesome. Just want to make sure you get it. So to fully understand this bag of gold thing, right? The master gives the bag of gold. How much the bag of gold was worth back then? 20 years of a day laborer's wage. One bag of gold. Got it? That's it. So that really helps. To another, he gave 2 bags, and to another, 1 bag, each according to his ability, and then he went on his journey. The master disappears. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went out at once and put his money to work and gained how many more? 5 bags. So also the one with 2 bags gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, he dug a hole, and what did he do with it? He hid it, and he hid his master's money. And after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. And the man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5 and said, Master, I'm a multi-level marketer. You entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. I have gained 5 more. And his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. That is what I want to hear at the end of my life. I don't know about you. That's what I want to hear. That's what I want to hear from God. And the man with 2 bags of gold came, and master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. And the man who had received 1 bag of gold came, and master, he said, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you've not sown and gathering where you've not scattered seed. So I was what? I was afraid, and I went out and I hid your gold in the ground, and here is what belongs to you. And he returns it. And his master replies, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I've not sown, you gather where I've not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers. Back then, if you put money on deposit with the bankers, you would get a little interest. Same is true today. So that when I returned, you would receive it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what they have, will be taken from them. And throw the worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. If you want to understand what weeping and gnashing of teeth is, just ask anyone who's a Dallas Cowboys fan. Okay, they will explain that to you. Okay. They really will. About 15 years ago, guy over here in the Dallas Cowboys sweatshirt just stood up and walked out. All right, anyways, there's a lot of good churches in the area. Anyways, I'm kidding. Hey, about 15 years ago, I love it, man, I love it. About 15 years ago, I was preaching and teaching a message on this passage in this particular parable. And at the end of the message, I said, hey, are there any of our community group leaders in the audience? And I said, if the first 3 that get up here, I'm going to give you something. And so 3 community group leaders jumped up. They came up on stage. They lined up. And I gave them envelopes. I gave them each one got an envelope. And inside the envelope, one of them had, just true story, one of them had $2,000. The other one had $1,000. The other one had $500. But they didn't know it. I said, okay, here's the deal. I want you to take those envelopes, and I want you to go to your meeting, your next small group meeting, your next community group meeting. You meet in a home, and I want you to open the envelope. Don't open it until you get there. But I want you to open that envelope, and then you as a group are going to talk about what do we do to live out this parable we just read. Like, how can we live it out? Let's put it into practice, right? And so the group with 2,000, they opened it up. They got back to me. They put the $2,000 back in the offering at the church the next weekend. Same envelope, sealed it up with a letter inside telling us how poor use of money that was, how upset they were with the church, and this and this and this, complain, horrible, you guys are despicable, why would you do that? How could you use God's money like that? I was like, adventures in missing the point. I mean, I literally wanted to text them and go, you wicked, lazy servants. I'm going to take the 2,000 and, give it to someone else. So the group with 1,000, they did something really cool. They opened up their envelope, and they knew of a single mom in our community whose car was broken down and just was going through a financial tough times, had 3 little kids, and just had kind of a rough situation. And so they used that $1,000. They fixed her car, and then this was awesome. They took her car to like Walmart and different places, and they just packed the car where you could hardly even fit into it. And they packed the car with like groceries and supplies for the house and laundry detergent, and just packed the thing, every square inch of it full. And they put it in her garage and just knocked on her door and said, hey, your car's fixed, and there's some gifts in the car for you. Lots of tears, lots of joy. It was awesome. Now the last group, they got the $500. And when they got the money, I'm going to be really honest with you. I knew the group leader, and I knew where they were from. And I'm just going to tell you right now, they were from a rough part of town in Los Angeles. Rough part of town. And I kind of felt like you should probably just keep the money. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, I was a little torn, and I kind of felt bad. Like, I'm going to put these people in a really interesting situation because they just don't have much. It's a group of all single women, single moms. They were sweet, sweet people, but really lived in a rough part of town and did not have a lot of financial resources. So I called them a week later and just said, hey, have you guys decided, left a message, have you decided? I didn't hear from them for like 2 weeks. And I was like, it's probably gone. It's probably Probably went to Vegas. Anyways, I didn't know what they did. But I was I'm going to be honest. I'm just being honest with you. I was being a little judgmental. I'm embarrassed to admit that. But I was just kind of like, yeah, of course, They called me back a week later and said, oh, hey, we forgot to tell you what we're doing with the money. I was like, oh, great. What are you guys doing? So we took the $500 and we printed up sponsorship brochures for a golf tournament we're going to put on. And we've been going around Los Angeles, all over the city, and we've been getting businesses to sponsor this golf tournament. And it's going to raise money for a group called Young Life so they can start a special needs ministry for teenagers in our community on Friday nights. They want to hire a staff member to run this youth group for special needs teenagers on Friday nights in Santa Clarita Valley. And I was like, that is incredible. So they put on this golf tournament. They got all these sponsors. They raised over $20,000. And to this day, John Pantelis is a dear friend of mine, is the guy who they helped get on staff at Young Life to work with those special needs kids. 15 years later from that message and from that time when they did that ministry to kids is still active. Hundreds of kids gather every Friday night and are ministered to, and those families get a break every Friday because a bunch of single women who didn't have much took Jesus' call to generosity seriously. It's awesome. That's when we say crazy like us, that's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. And some of you, you look back at your life and go, man, I haven't done anything like that, Well, it's not too late. It's not too late to start being generous. Now let's go back and look at the start of the parable of the bags of gold. In Matthew chapter 25, Jesus says, again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. Jesus is appealing to our common sense in this parable. That's what he's doing. And he's saying, listen, who does the gold belong to? Belongs to the master, belongs to God, right? And who are the servants? That's us, right? And the servants, we're entrusted with the master's gold. We're the servants. The point is, God's the owner, we're the managers. Guys, I hope you caught that, because that's the key to being generous. That mindset. If you believe that, if you live by that mindset, you can be generous. Because generous people think differently. They don't assume that everything is theirs to consume. They truly believe what Psalm 24:1 says, that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And if we really believe that, we will live differently. This mindset that God's the owner, we're the managers, it crushes that cycle that we looked at earlier. It crushes it. Now, I need to apologize. This whole message, I've just been thinking about food. I've just been totally distracted. I love food. And I want to go out and eat afterwards. Like Roanoke has the best restaurants. You guys know that, right? You have incredible restaurants. Anytime I come up here, I just go and eat. You just have amazing restaurants. And I realized on my way here, I lost my wallet. And I don't have any cash, and I could use some cash. And I've just been thinking, I'm just distracted. I really could use some cash. So if anyone, I don't know if you have any. Whoa. Oh my goodness. All right. Oh my goodness. Okay. Whoa. Now here's the deal. Man, anyone want to go to Hard 8 now, right? We'll go to Hard 8. That's fantastic. That's awesome. All right, back to the message. God's the owner, and we're the managers. Now that was weird, right? Was that weird? That was weird. As a matter of fact, here, sir, come take this. Come take it. Seriously, come take this. That was weird, right? Do you know why? Thank you. Do you know why this gentleman stood up so quickly and gave me this $100? Yeah, I gave it to him before the service started. Now, this gentleman's super generous. I don't know. He's... Poor Bob's down here like, awesome. Yeah, and this guy's generous too. He's a friend of mine, but yeah, it's mine. It's not his. I gave it to him. I said, hey, when I asked for some cash, give me some cash. And he did. And it was not hard, was it? Why? It was mine. And that's the mindset we have. You see, generous people understand whatever they receive, whatever they have, it was given to them by God. It's not like it's mine. And whenever we spend money, we make money, we give money, we do this, we fall into this trap of thinking, this is my money. This is my stuff. God's the owner, we're the managers. Why is it so hard? The wicked, lazy servant will tell us in verse 25, it says, I was afraid. This is why it's so hard to live this way. Because in our minds, we can go, yeah, this makes sense. God's the owner, we're the managers, I understand that, but it's hard. It's really hard because we're afraid. Remember the wicked, lazy servant, he had, how much, you think about, he didn't get much money. No, he got 20 years of a day wage, right? He got a lot of money, and he just hid it. He buried it. Why? Because the servant in this parable, he lived by fear. And the two faithful servants, they lived by faith. God has entrusted each and every one of us with different resources. And I don't know what that is. And for some of you, man, I'm sorry. Some of you are struggling. Some of you are doing great. Some of you are like amazing. God's blessed you. But it doesn't matter where you fall into that spectrum. That doesn't mean like God doesn't love you or God doesn't. No, that has nothing to do with it. Just we've all been given a certain amount of resources at this season in our life. The question is, are we going to live in fear and stay in this cycle of greed, or are we going to live by faith, right? We're going to live by faith and change our mindset. Because there's a better kind of crazy. There's a better kind of crazy to live. I got a friend, David Cruz. He's a realtor. And when I bought my first house, I was so nervous. My wife and I had saved and just kind of lived on macaroni and cheese for years. I mean, we really just saved, trying to buy a house. And I'm sitting across from my friend David. He's just really funny, like short, heavy-set Hispanic dude, my friend of mine. He's a dear friend of mine. And David is just crazy, right? And I'm so stressed out. I don't know if you have bought a house before or went through this when you first bought a house, but by the way, for me, I don't know about you, but for me, it was the most stressful thing in the world because I'm like, what are we doing? We're signing all our life away. I feel like they're just going to take my wife and kids and they're just going to, what am I doing? These are huge numbers here that we're signing. I'm like, this is crazy. Maybe we shouldn't do this. And I'm just upset, but I want the house so bad. And I got the little sheet with the house on it, right? And I'm talking to my realtor at his office, and I got that sheet, and I'm like, David, my wife and I, we want this house so bad. Like, we feel like this is our place. We feel like this is where we're supposed to be. This is our home. And David's so great. He's so dramatic. He stands up, Juan comes over and goes, grabs the paper out of my hand. He goes, this is not your home. He's like, this is not your home, man. This is temporary. Because you're not home yet. He slams the paper down. And initially, I'm like, dude, stop being like a weird Christian. You know what I mean? Initially that, seriously, I'm like, okay, but David meant it. He meant it. Do you know why? Because I lived with David. He let me stay at his house one summer. And that was not just something he said. That was not just something he sang about at church. God's the owner, we're the managers. He lived it. When I was an intern in my early 20s, I didn't have enough money to get an apartment. I was working at a church. David let me stay at his house. I kid you not, every week, David would bring someone home and they would eat with his family. They would sit at the table and total stranger or someone he'd met or someone he'd known, he'd bring them in. Sometimes they were homeless. And I was like, David, we live in the San Fernando Valley, bro. This is not safe. But he just opened up his home and we'd have a big meal and he'd give them clothes or food or get them into a shelter, whatever they needed, he'd provide their needs. And then here's what would happen. At Sunday, I would just watch this in my early 20s and watch this. They would go home, they would leave or whatever they would go. And then on Sunday at church, that would be the exact person who was walking down the aisle and getting in the baptistry and getting baptized. And I would be like, there they are. Like they were at David's house. Getting baptized or turning their life to Jesus. It blew my mind. And I remember asking David, because I'm in my 20s, I'm like, how do you do that? Like, what's your secret sauce, man? I want to live a life like David Cruz. You're the godliest person I've ever been around in my whole life. Everything you do is generous and giving, and it's not, how do you do it? And I thought about him as I was writing this message. He said, I just plan for it. It's not random for him. Like he planned, he goes, I budget for it. My wife and I, we set aside money. We've always lived with less than we make. because I've always driven a used car. I've always done this. I've always just lived in a way that allows me to be generous. I've always had a plan. He looked at me like, that's just that's how you do it, right? He didn't have a recollection of living in that cycle. For him, you live with a plan. You be generous. It so challenged me. So let's remember that. Let's change our mindset, because Kevin's coming back next week from Australia. He'll probably have a different accent, and he's going to talk to us. He's going to talk to us about this plan, how to be generous. And he's going to give us a plan on how to do that. But here's the thing. The plan is garbage if you don't change your mindset. The plan's a waste of time if you don't change your mindset. So this week, here's what I want to challenge you to do. I just want to challenge you, try and think differently this week. Just spend this whole week looking at everything that you have and every person you interact with and just go, you know what? It's not all mine to consume. And I'm not going to assume I'm the owner. I'm going to live as the manager. And if we'll do that, we'll be ready for next week, and we'll be ready to live a life that's crazy generous, that leaves a legacy like my friend David Cruz. Let's pray together. God, I just thank you for your generosity towards us. I thank you that we can be a church that can talk about money in a positive, good way, because God, I know that you don't want us to worry. You don't want us to be discontent. God, you want us to have meaning and purpose in the way that we give and the way that we live. So will you help us right now? Will you help us to change our mindset, to change the way we think about what you've given us so we can live differently? We need your help to do that. We ask this in Jesus' name.